Okay, welcome to Chapter 10, the Muscular System, Part 1. Okay, this chapter we're going to focus on the skeletal muscles and look at how they interact and bring about movement, the criteria for naming muscles, and then we are actually not really going to look at the leverage. We're going to learn muscles themselves. Okay. Let's go ahead and start. Now, before we can learn the actual muscles and what they're called and all of that, we have to learn parts of the muscles. Okay, tendons. Tendons connect muscle to bone. Every muscle has an origin and an insertion and a belly. The origin is where the muscle originates. It's usually the more stationary of the two ends of a muscle. Okay, the insertion is the opposite end of the origin, and typically the insertion will be the muscle will insert at a point that is less stable slash stationary. Okay. Now, the belly of the muscle is the middle of the muscle, the part that contracts this thick body of the muscle. So see this part that I'm kind of circling, this is the belly of your bicep brachii. Okay. Now, some muscles have more than one belly, and we refer to those as heads. So sometimes a muscle will have two heads or three. Bi means two, tri means three, or quad, which means four. Okay, so let's take a look at the breakdown of this term, bicep brachii. Okay, bi means two, sept means head, that means it has two heads, brachii means arm. Okay, so the bicep brachii is the perfect example to utilize in this situation, because if you look very close here, this is called the bicep brachii for a reason. We said that bi means two, okay, and bicept means two heads, and indeed the bicep brachii has two origin points, right there and there. Okay, and there's the insertion point over here. Now, let's go ahead and look at the opposing muscle on the back of the arm is the tricep brachii. Okay, it's called the tricep brachii because it has 1, 2, 3 bellies or 3 heads. And it's brachii because brachii means what? Do you guys remember? Brachii, anything that, this is from our old terminology. But I want you guys to remember this permanently. You're going to see it again in part 2 of this class. Brachii is the upper arm. All right, very good. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is muscle function. Now, our muscles are typically organized into a group, and that group will bring about that function of a particular muscle. Okay, so we have a prime mover in a group of muscles. We'll have a prime mover, which is the agonist. We'll have an antagonist and a synergist. A prime mover or agonist is responsible for the specific movement. It's the major muscle responsible for that movement. Okay, now in this example, our prime mover would be our Bicep Brachii, okay, which brings about the flexion of the arm. The antagonistic muscle is responsible for the reverse. It's responsible for opposing or reversing a particular movement, and typically the prime mover and the antagonist are on opposite locations of a joint, which is true in this case as well, because the antagonist in this situation is the Tricep Brachii, which is on the other side of the arm. And a synergist is a secondary muscle that brings about the desired movement, and it's an assistant to the prime mover. Okay, and in this case, the brachialis muscle and the brachioradialis muscle, there's two synergistic muscles that assist the bicep brachii, brachioradialis and brachialis. All right, so muscles. Typically, they don't always have a synergist, but typically they do. There's always an agonist, and which is a prime mover, and an antagonist. And from time to time, there are synergistic muscles as well. Okay, now I want you guys to remember these relationships and the relative terms, and also to understand that a prime mover for one action can actually be the antagonist for another action or for the opposite action. So let's say we wanted to flex the tricep brachii, okay, or extend the forearm, which is the opposite action of the bicep brachii. The tricep brachii in that situation will be the prime mover. Okay, so in the previous one, it was the antagonist, but here it's the prime mover, where the bicep brachii is going to be the antagonist in this situation. Okay, which is basically what we're trying to do, is the opposite of flexion is extension. So this would be extension of the arm, okay, and then the synergistic muscles that help bicep brachii before brachialis and brachioradialis are not synergistic muscles here, but the tricep brachii does also have a synergistic muscle. Okay, so let's recap what we just discussed. Muscles typically to execute a function require a prime mover, the agonist muscle, an antagonist, and sometimes a synergist. Okay, the prime mover is the muscle responsible for producing a specific movement. The antagonist is responsible for reversing that particular movement, and the synergist assists the prime mover. Okay. When we're discussing one action, in this case this is flexion of the forearm, the prime mover for this action can be an antagonist for another action, which would be what we're discussing here. The bicep brachii for extension of the arm is the antagonist, and the tricep brachii is the prime mover or agonist in this case. Okay, so just be aware that a prime mover for one action can be an antagonist for another or opposite action. Now, is nomenclature, which is the naming of the muscles. So we name the muscles, or not we, they've been named based on their size, the muscle size, the muscle shape, and the location in the body. Okay, the number of origins, the direction of the muscle fibers, and the action performed by the muscle. All right, so this is pretty straightforward, but it is very important. So I'm gonna review this with you guys, and I want you to pay close attention. Definitely take notes. Anytime I'm sketching something on here, not that exactly, but anytime I start sketching something, it's important to take those notes because this information, is not in the slides. I'm adding to it. All right, so here we go. So size. Okay, size is a pretty easy one. This one's pretty straightforward. Maximus means the largest in a group of muscles. Okay, minimus is the smallest in a group of muscles. Okay, now at the same time, there are other muscles where they will use the term major for large, minor for small. Okay, longus for the longest muscle in the group, and brevis means short. Okay, the shape. Our shape's pretty straightforward now. A deltoid. Deltoid is in reference to shape, and what it actually means is it's a triangle. All right, and there we go. Sorry, that took so long. Now, deltoid means triangle, and it just simply means that is the shape of that muscle. Now, everybody has their shoulder muscle, and we know that it's called the deltoid, but we did not know, unless you did. Typically, most people don't know the reason why it's called the deltoid is because it is a triangle-shaped muscle. Okay, and then we have the rhomboid, which is a diamond shape. And I'm not going to attempt to draw that, but typically, what is that, like the diamond shape? Something like this, right? Okay, yeah, it's not very good, but I think you guys get the point. Okay, rhomboid major, rhomboid minor. You've probably heard these muscles termed before. Serratus. Think of a serrated edge. It just means that it's sawtooth. Okay, everybody knows what that means, right? Like when you use a bread knife at home, it has a serrated edge, right? Or a saw has a serrated edge. Okay, trapezius. Something that is a trapezoid shape is a kite shape. Kite, the kites used to fly when you were a kid. Like those kites. This is the trapezius shape. And, like a little kite that you fly, right? When the sunshine is out and the wind's blowing. All right. Now, so we have deltoid, triangle, rhomboid, diamond shape, serratus, sawtooth, and trapezius. Okay, what about location? Now these ones are easy because you've already studied these terms, but we're going to recap them anyways. So pectoralis always means chest. Brachio always means upper arm. Radialis always means in reference to the radius bone. Gluteus means buttocks. Femoris means the femur bone. Sterno. Sterno is in reference to your sternum. Cleido. Cleido means your clavicle, your collarbone. The mastoid, anything that is in reference to that has the term mastoid, it's referring to the mastoid process. Now, the mastoid process is in the temporal bone. So, Okay, so just keep that in mind. We're talking about the mastoid process. Digiti. Zoom out a little bit. Okay, digiti is in reference to your digits, like fingers and toes. The large thumb is pollicus. Your big toe is hallucis. Okay, and then these ones are straightforward. Lateralis means lateral. A muscle can be lateral. Let's say our quads, for example. There's a lateralis, there's a medialis, and an intermedius. Okay, clearly lateralis is lateral to the midline. Medialis is medial to the midline. Intermedius is in between. Easy peasy. All right, learning this the nomenclature will help you to be able to identify muscles, name them, and remember them, because you will have this background information. And even if you get thrown off for a second, you can go back to your location. Where's it located? Okay, shape-wise, you can look at, in reference to, is it the largest in the group, and so on. So all of this is very relevant. All right, so the number of origins helps quite a bit. Anything that has 2 origins is going to be called a bicep. So we have Bicep Brachii, we have Bicep Femoris. So Bicep Femoris, where's that? Where can you find the bicep? Okay, I hate writing with this. Let me actually just cover this. Where can you find, I want you guys to look this up, and you might already just know it, but Bicep Femoris. Okay, if we have something called a muscle called the Bicep Femoris, and I don't know anything about it, but I just have the name in front of me, I can actually figure out quite a bit. So I know that bicep means 2 head, and femoris is in reference to the femur bone. So it has to be a muscle in the thigh that connects to the femur bone, and it has 2 heads. Bicep femoris. Okay, so this is how you're going to use nomenclature to identify things aside from just straight memorization. Okay, and then we have triceps, we have quadriceps. Now, and this is how, again, another way the muscles are named. Now, what about this one? This one's very interesting to me. Some muscles are given this directional terminology, like rectus abdominis. Okay, that means the fibers are running straight up and down, like erect. So rectus, immediately I want you to think of Homo erectus, who was the first to walk straight. Okay, transverse is when the fibers of the muscle are positioned in the body, and when we look at the way that the fibers are running, they're going to run side to side. Okay, and then we have oblique. The term oblique will be utilized to name muscles that are indeed oblique, which just simply means that they have a diagonal pattern. Okay, definitely draw these sketches. The straight lines for rectus, the side lines for transverse, and the diagonal lines for oblique. Okay, now an adductor. Okay, now I'm going to draw a midline. Okay, this is my and you should draw this as well. Mine's gonna, you guys will just have to bear with me a little bit, because obviously this is, I'm using software to draw, and I can't do it by hand right now because of the online teaching. Okay, so what I'm drawing for you guys here is a midline. So let's say this is a person's body. Okay, this is their midline. Now, when our muscles are categorized based on their action, right? And we've learned some of these actions. Now, we're going to go through them quickly. When something is an adductor muscle, it could be called, adductor or abductor or flexor, extensor, levator. They have a particular action. Anything that is an adductor, it adds to the midline. Okay, in other words, it brings the muscle closer to the midline. So think of ADD, add. Okay, so you're adding that to the midline, or really in reality, it just means that the muscle, its action is to come closer to the midline. Now we have abductor muscles, and remember abductor, and think of a kidnapper, an abductor, or aliens, alien abduction. What happens when there's an abduction? That means that something is, being taken away. Obviously that's worst case scenario would be something like a kidnapping, of course, but the fact is that's what abduction means. It means that something is being taken away, whether it's a person, or the action of this muscle is to move or abduct away from the midline. Okay, flexor flexes the muscle. Extender allows a muscle to extend in the opposite direction. And levator muscles allow elevation to occur. So that's pretty straightforward. We have levator muscles in our jaw. So you can take your jaw. I want everyone to take their jaw and kind of stick out your bottom teeth and elevate your jaw. All right. Now, on top of that, muscles have patterns of fascicle arrangements that are quite significant. Some are completely circular, like this one over here. These ones are interesting because they technically, have an origin and insertion, but it's not your typical muscle. Okay, and of course, it's this arrangement of contractile muscle, contractile rings. Okay, a perfect example is the muscles that surround your lips. A convergent muscle. Okay, so this is in reference to very specifically how the fascicle is arranged. This one, something that's convergent, has a large origin, and it has a single insertion. Okay, and that makes sense because the pectoralis major has this huge origin, and the insertion is one tendon insertion. Okay, a fusiform is a spindle-shaped muscle with parallel fibers, such as the Bicep Brachii that we were looking at earlier. So it does look like a spindle shape. See how it's tapered on this side, and then tapered on this side? That's a spindle. Okay. Oh, and of course the fibers run parallel. All right. This one is referred to as parallel. And ultimately what's happening here is the fascicles are parallel to a long axis. Okay, so a long axis is something like this muscle, the sartorius muscle that wraps all the way around the quadriceps and connects back here. Okay. And it's very strap-like. And there we go. All right. Now, we also have fascicles arranged in patterns called the pennant, which are short fascicles. Okay. They're attached obliquely to a central tendon, which runs the length of the muscle. Okay, so the first one that we're going to look at is the multi-pennant. The multi-pennant appears like a feather shape, or it appears feathers are inserted into one tendon. So here you can see that. This would be the one tendon, and this would be, the feather shape. That's one feather. That's two. Okay, that's three. Okay, so this is the deltoid muscle. So that's a pretty good example. But remember, this is just in reference to the fascicle arrangements. We haven't got into actual learning the muscles yet. Okay, the next one is the bipennant. Bi, what means what? Two. So the bipennant fascicles insert from opposite sides of the tendon. Okay, let's take a look. This is the rectus femoris muscle that I mentioned earlier. Or no, I said bicep femoris, I'm sorry. This one's called rectus femoris. Okay, and what it's saying is that fascicles are coming from opposite sides of the tendon. That is true. So if we look very, very closely, just zoom out a little bit. There we go. Okay, so there's our tendon in white. And notice that the fascicles are running in opposite. They're running opposite of the tendon, because look at the tendons running straight. And those ones are running obliquely. And then the unipennant. Okay, uni means one. The fascicle attached here is only attached to one side of the tendon. Okay, so in other words, here's the muscle, and then it's connected to this tendon over here. The whole muscle's attached to it, but not on this side. This side of the muscle is free. Okay, now an example that they're giving us is the extensor, Digitorium, Longus. Okay, and look at this one. See, it's attached over here to the bone. And on this side, the muscle's free. All right, so that's that. Now let's go ahead and move forward with the rest of the lecture and get to the muscles. Now, the human body has 600 muscles. They are grouped according to their function and location. And ultimately, by the time we're done with this entire lecture, part 1 and 2, we should know the following: the description of a muscle relative to locations, relative to the location of other muscles, and their location in the body. That one's a given. Okay, you should know their origin, insertion, and action. Now we're going to go through them. I'm going to teach it to you, and then I want you guys to practice, practice, practice. Okay, so ultimately, when we're done, you should be able to identify them on a picture. You should know their basic function and the approximate origin and insertion. And we should know if they belong to a group of muscles. That is something we need to be aware of. All right, so here we go. Let's go ahead and get started. We are going to be experts at the human body by the time we are done with this class. The muscles of the head, face, and neck. Now, I'm going to start with showing you a muscle, going through the origin, insertion, and action of that muscle. And these muscles that I have in our slideshow will be the muscles that are potential test questions for lab and lecture. So typically the way that it works is I will give you guys the muscles I want you to know and that we're supposed to know for this class. We're not going to go through all 600. You are welcome for that. Okay, and we're going to start with the muscles of the face, neck, head. All right, the first muscle I want to introduce is called frontalis. And the good thing about this is that it's on the frontal bone, so it's not surprising that it's called the frontalis. Okay, now the origin is called the epicranial aponeuroses, and it's this kind of fascia membrane. Okay, and then it inserts into the skin over the forehead, like the skin over the forehead. It just inserts right into there. So just right into here, into the skin. And its primary job is to raise the eyebrows. It also wrinkles the skin in the forehead. The Orbicularis Oculi. I want you guys to look at these words. These are Latin words, and they get very they can be a little tedious to pronounce, but I like to break them down and try to pronounce them correctly, and I like for you guys to do it too. So I want you to pronounce this as Orbicularis Oculi. And orbicularis is in reference to the orbit. And really, it just means circular. Orbit, circular, circle, and oculi means eye. Okay, so if you want to note that, that'd be good because you'll see orbicularis other places. Oculi means eye. Okay, and there it is. We have this perfect circle. Okay, now the origin of this muscle is there's a medial orbital margin where it is where it originates, right, like in here, and then it will and the zygomatic bone. Okay, so it has two points of origin. We can't actually see the orbital margin, but it's connected, and the zygomatic bone is mostly covered, but it's over here. And this is a circular fascicle shape, of course, and then it inserts into the skin around the actual eye itself. And this is responsible for blinking and closing the eyelids, of course, which is part of blinking. It depresses the skin on the forehead as well, meaning it pulls it down. The Orbicularis Oris. Okay, we already know Orbicularis means circular, and Oris now it means, think of oral or the mouth. And that's exactly what this is. These are the muscles that surround your mouth, okay, and it encircles the mouth. The origin is in the maxilla and mandible bones, and it inserts directly into the lips, and the muscle controls movements of the mouth. And it's also called the kissing muscle because it allows you to pucker your lips. The masseter muscle, it's this nice thick jaw muscle. The origin is at the zygomatic process and arch right there. Okay, and it inserts down here into the mandible. Okay, now its job or its function is to elevate the mandible, which means it'll lift it upwards. This is a big, thick, strong muscle in your jaw. Temporalis. Temporalis here in blue, it lines the temporal bone, no surprise there. The origin is the temporal fossa. The insertion is the mandible, the coronoid process of the mandible. Okay, the action of this muscle is to elevate and retract the mandible, so it actually is, so you can see you can see it a little bit. No, we can't see it, I'm sorry. It's covered, but it's there. Ultimately, what it's gonna do, it's gonna help elevate, okay, the mandible, your jaw, and retract. Retraction means it helps your jaw move this way, and of course we'll need the same. We'll need to be able to bring it back. Okay, very good. So right now you can retract, elevate your mandible, and those are the muscles that are going to be involved. Okay, the Buccinator muscle. It's pronounced Buccinator. I've heard them say Buccinator. Buccinator, it sounds better to me. I like saying Buccinator. So the Buccinator muscle is this little muscle right here in the jaw. It's little, but it is thick, and it's quite important. It has a huge job in helping you chew up your food and compress. It compresses the cheek. Okay, so its origin is going to be in the aviolar process of the maxilla. Remember, the aviolar process is where the teeth are. Okay, and then there's three origins: the maxilla, the buccinator ridge of the mandible. Okay, so part of it's up here. There's an origin point up here. There's an origin point on the mandible. And then on the tergomandibular raphe, which I can't even see in this picture here. Okay, and then it will insert directly into the lips. Right, actually, that's actually a good thing to, let me see if I can make this a little smaller. Okay, it's just not cooperating. Well, right there, see, it's covered by the Orbicularis Oris, but underneath that buccinator muscle is dead ending or inserting right into the lip, underneath the Orbicularis Oris, and its job is to compress the cheek. Okay, this is another look at the buccinator muscle, highlighted there in blue. The Zygomaticus Major. All right, so there's the Zygomaticus Major in blue. Its origin is the zygomatic bone, and the insertion is the corners of your mouth, the skin and muscle at the corners of the mouth. There is a Zygomaticus minor. Let's just stick with the major on this point. But however, the minor is there as well. Okay, go ahead and look at this. Now, muscles surrounding the tongue. All right. Now let's take a look at this muscle. Here's a human skull. Of course, this is the tongue. Okay, there's different muscles that are involved in chewing your food, mixing your food, and the tongue is one of them. And then these guys work with the tongue to help it move around, help you chew up your food, basically. It's not more complicated than that. Okay, it originates at the mandible. Okay, and it's going to insert into the tongue and the hyoid bone. Remember the hyoid bone? That's the hyoid bone right there. It's the one bone that doesn't articulate with anything. I mean, with another bone, but it is connected to muscles. This is one. Okay, its job is to protract the tongue. All right, the next one is hyoglosis. It's connected to the hyoid bone at the origin. See that? Okay, it inserts right into the tongue and the hyoid. Okay, its job is to depress the tongue. Styloglossus. Okay, so see that muscle in blue? And it kind of just is long and skinny. Okay, its origin is the temporal bone right there. And it inserts, see that little thing sticking out? That's part of the temporal bone. It inserts at the tongue. And its job is to help retract the tongue, or it does retract the tongue. Okay, the Zygomaticus Major is responsible for smile, for your smile. Okay, the Orbicularis Oris is your kissing muscle or your pucker muscle. I didn't cover these two, nor did I cover these. Orbicularis Oculi, the Frontalis. Okay, oculi, Orbicularis oculi is blinking. Frontalis allows us to raise our eyebrows. All right, so the muscles to know, Frontalis, Orbicularis oculi and Oris, Masseter, Temporalis, Buccinator, Zygomaticus Major, and the muscles surrounding the tongue, including the tongue itself. Okay, so make sure you add those to our list. Let's see. I wonder if I could just... Yeah. Let me see if I could just add these to the list really quick. Otherwise, you guys can just add them yourself. Okay, it's just not working. Oh, it is. Okay. I'm just going to put muscles around the tongue. Make sure you know those. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. We're going to look now at muscles of the neck and muscles of the vertebrae. The first one we're going to talk about is the Sternocleidomastoid. The Sternocleidomastoid. Now, based on the terminology that we've learned today, sterno means what? You said sternum, you are correct. Cleido, what does cleido mean? We just learned this. Cleido. Cleido means clavicle. And mastoid is in reference to the mastoid process of the temporal bone. So we have this three-part name, sternocleidomastoid. Okay. Now, this is one of the major muscles in the neck. There we go. And let's take a look at it here. The sternocleidomastoid has 2 points of origin. Okay, so one is right here. Actually, I'm going to use a circle for this. On the manubrium of the sternum. And the other one is on the clavicle. 2 points of origin. Now the insertion, there's 2 points of insertion actually. So we're gonna, one is at the mastoid process of the temporal bone, and the other is going to be on the occipital bone, the superior nuchal line of the occipital bone. And the job here of this muscle is to flex and rotate the head. And so this muscle is quite large. That's the sternocleidomastoid. Let's take another look at the sternocleidomastoid. Okay, see how it wraps all the way back here? So that's how it gets to the occipital lobe. I'm sorry, the occipital bone and the superior nuchal line. Okay, it's going to be down here. Okay, and then of course the temporal bone and the mastoid process. It's like right here. The nuchal line is down here, or well, actually it's back here. All right, so sternocleidomastoid, it's a big, big, big muscle in your neck. Next muscle, the scalenese. Scalenese muscles. Okay, now these ones, it's technically one muscle, but it's it looks like several, but it's not. Okay, so it originates at the C7, from the C7 to the T6. Okay, now remember, the cervical spine has 7 vertebrae. The thoracic column has 12. And the lumbar has 5 bones. So if the origin of this muscle is the spinous process. Remember the spinous process of the vertebrae, okay, of 7 vertebrae, C7 through T6. So it's kind of hard to see the origin. You can see it a little bit. And then ultimately, the insertion is going to be at the first 2 ribs. And its job is to elevate your first 2 ribs. Okay, the splenius. The splenius is quite a big muscle. Okay. This is showing both of them, the left and the right. Now the origin is going to be the transverse process of the cervical spine. Okay, so that's going to be down here in the cervical spine. All of that. Right? And then the insertion point is the temporal bone and the occipital lobe. Or I'm sorry, the occipital bone. I keep saying lobe because that's what the brain, the sections of the brains, we refer to them as lobes, like occipital lobe. is part of the brain that's right under the occipital bone. Okay, now, okay, and the temporal bone. Okay, you can see the connection at the occipital. There's the temporal. Those are both the insertion. The origins are down here. This one is responsible for extension and hyperextension of your head. So if you extend your head, that's like pulling it backwards, and hyperextension is extending it even further. The erector spinae muscle group. Okay, the erector spinae muscle group are a group of muscles that are superficial, meaning that they're not deep in the body, and they act as prime movers in the extension of your vertebral column. Now, I'm going to go over a few of these, the key ones. We're going to start with the iliocostalis. The iliocostalis. Now, this is quite an impressive muscle because it is so long. It extends from the iliac crest way down here on the hip bone, and it runs the length of the entire vertebral column and is going to insert at the C4 and C6 in the neck. And its job is to extend and flex your vertebral column. Okay, next muscle is the longissimus. Longissimus, okay, is inside or inner to or medial to the iliocostalis. Okay, see how thin that is? Okay, so the iliocostalis is out here. So it's medial to it. All right, either way, the origin begins at the transverse process of the lumbar. Now remember the transverse process of any vertebrae. Okay, let's take a look. It's hard to see the transverse process there, but it's down here. And remember, transverse means side to side. So these guys are connected to the transverse process of the lumbar spine on this side and this side, because there is two. Okay, and it's going to stay connected to the transverse process through the entire spinal cord. So it moves, it's connected transverse process all the way through the lumbar, thoracic, and cervical spine. And then it's going to insert at the transverse process and thoracic vertebrae. It's going to insert at the transverse process of the cervical and thoracic vertebrae. It will also insert on the ribs and the temporal bone. I can't see the rib insertion, but we can definitely see the temporal bone insertion over here. That's a big one. Do we see the ribs at all? I think that if you flip this around on visible body, you can see the insertion point. Now, the action of the longissimus extends and flexes the vertebral column, and it helps with rotating the head as well. Spinalis. Okay, spinalis is highlighted in blue, of course. The origin is the spinous process of the lower lumbar and thoracic vertebrae. Okay, we can see that here. This is okay. Yeah, it's perfect. So we can see mostly the origin. Okay, and then the insertion is going to be the spinous process of the cervical and upper thoracic. Probably like around here. There we go. Okay, and it actually has very similar, it has a similar action in that its job is to extend the vertebral column so you can bend backwards. Okay, the last muscle in this part 1 we're going to discuss is pretty straightforward. These are just muscles in between our vertebrae. Now remember, okay, this is the body of the vertebrae over here. These are the intervertebral discs right there, okay? And this would be our spinous process right here for one vertebrae. I'm just going to draw it. And then we should have, that's the spinous process. And then where is my transverse? Yeah, this would be another spinous process sticking out this way. This is another spinous process. So this is for that vertebrae. Okay, spinous process. So these are 3 vertebrae. So if we look at the spinal cord from the side, we see the spinous processes, or the spinous process, which is a bone marking, they stick out. So right now your spinous process is like a dorsal fin type situation where it's going to be sticking outwards. So this is, say this was your back. Let's say this is your back, okay? We're not specifying which vertebrae this is. We're just going through the anatomy again. Spinous process sticks out this way. Okay, so this side, where I have my arrows here, this is your back. Okay, this side, of course, would have your internal organs, depending on which part of the body would tell us which part we're in. This looks like the lumbar spine to me, but either way, let's take a look here. I want you guys to, I'm not going to go through the individual muscles, but I want to show you, actually I'm going to go through a couple of these muscles. I want you to know a couple of them. There's a lot, but I want you to know the main ones that are important, such as this one. The Inter Transversarius. What do you think? What do you think it's connecting? It's in the name. Okay, these muscles are in between every vertebrae, right? And it specifically connects 2 transverse processes from 2 different vertebrae. Okay, that's one. Okay, let's go ahead and move that one. Now, let's see here. Aha. Okay. The next one. Rotatorus. Okay, this muscle connects the spinous process to the transverse process. Transverse, and then notice it's going to connect to another transverse process. 2 connections. Very good. So this one is connecting the upper segment of the spinous process to a transverse process of the same vertebrae and the vertebrae underneath it. Okay, and at a very particular angle. Now, the next muscle, the multifidus, it connects the spinous process, the tip of the spinous process, to the transverse process of the vertebrae underneath. Okay, and then finally, the last one, and this is a good one too, in between each spinous process, okay? In between each spinous process, like there, and that one too. These are called interspinalis. All right, so you want to know all of the muscles of the face, neck, and vertebral column that we have covered in this lecture, and I will see you guys in part 2.